Peace, salam. This is Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV is always there on Galaxy 19 satellite 24/7. We are on Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Roku, whole lot of social media, and our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. Yeah, that is muslimnetwork.tv. I was heading to St. Louis. It was just before the pandemic, a while before that is. And while waiting, a passenger says salam, and that's how conversation begins among Muslims. And he immediately went to the topic. He says Muslims are being discouraged from entering into the medical profession. I never heard of that. I say, what evidence do you have? And he told me that he is a professor and he was going to St. Louis actually to teach, and he teaches at multiple places. They said that's what he has noticed, and he was very firm and satisfied of his opinion. Muslim physicians in America are the leaders of the community. Mosques are built by them. They led a different portion, and they serve our communities. In New York, 10% of all physicians are Muslims trying to save lives on the daily basis. Actually, in Long Island, New York, a large part of New York borough, New York City's borough, its chairperson of the COVID task force actually is Muslim woman with a couple of children, husband and mom, and attended 3 hospitals, as well as chaired the task force on that. So Muslims are busy saving lives of their neighbors, except neighbors sometimes don't know. And then I was sitting before that, and everything came together after hearing that professor, a physician. He told me, I was in one of my intern was getting married, so I went there. And in the whole wedding, I didn't know anybody except the groom himself. So I just started conversation with somebody sitting left to me. And his name was Muhammad something, I forgot his name. And I asked him, what do you do? And he was a physician. And then he says, I said, okay, you have your own practice, or what do you do? It turned out that he is employed with someone after 15 years of practice. And he says, with a name like Muhammad, I have challenges in this profession. Then memories took me back. Way before 9/11, I was staying at a physician's place in Florida who was a cardiologist and the only cardiologist there. And when someone was brought into the hospital in that rural community, probably one of the poorest communities, and he was asked about his situation and health situation. Left train of my thoughts somehow. So someone was brought in with heart attack there. And as soon as he saw the Muslim physician, he said, no, I don't want to be treated by this raghead. And of course, he didn't treat him. And nurses tried to convince him, and, problem continues until his wife prevails and convinces him that he must get a treatment. He got healthy and all that. Long story short, and one day he showed up on the physician's home. I want to learn about Islam. But that's how it started. How widespread is discrimination against Muslims? How Muslims are serving and benefiting our neighbors? How Muslims are involved in research, finding out problems and issues in health medicine, not only in health policy, but of different medicine, discovering different things and providing guidelines for people to come up with medicine. Muslims are first-class Muslims, and without a question, first-class citizen and great neighbors serving everyone. It's about time America realizes how they contribute and what is their contribution. To discuss that here, With us is Dr. Teepu Siddique. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Dr. Siddique.
Thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Teepu Siddique is professor of neurology, cell and development biology, and pathology at the Northwestern University in Chicago. He's a graduate of the prestigious Dow Medical College in Pakistan. Well, Professor, you're professor of neurology as well as cell and development biology and pathology. Are you professor 4 times or 1 time?
Just 1 time, but in different departments because of the interdisciplinary interest and work that I do. So, in recognition of those contributions, they appoint you, they give you secondary appointments. So, my primary appointment is in neurology.
Okay, so there are secondary. So you go teach in different subdivision division of medicine, but your primary focus is neurology.
Neurology and the genetics of neurological disease.
Okay, yeah, genetics. In your bio somewhere on Northwestern University, I don't see anywhere mention of anything related to genetics or genes. And what once I was hearing your lecture at a university, at East West University, and you took us through, bringing your research to a layperson level. I don't think I fully followed everything, but your research was essentially, took a strong step in the direction that you discovered a gene which causes several degenerative diseases. Am I saying it correctly? Why don't you describe what you do?
Well, I came in 1990 to Northwestern, and I brought 91 in January, and brought neurogenetics to Chicago, and established the first dedicated neurogenetics laboratory here at Northwestern. And my group was instrumental in discovering several genes related to neurodegenerative disorders and other neuromuscular disorders. Starting with the first gene discovery and cause in ALS, which is a neurodegenerative disease that affects the muscles through degeneration of neurons in the brain and spinal cord. It's a fatal disease, and people die within 3 to 5 years of the disease.
So Chicago area didn't have any
The
research.
mouse first model of genetic.
So Chicago area.
Well, they may have had some research, obviously. No, but I'm talking about neurogenetics. There wasn't a dedicated laboratory into neurogenetics. So.
Okay. So when was that those genes were discovered, and what is the implication for those people who have these type of diseases?
So prior to that discovery of the first gene in ALS, it was a complete black box. And very senior people who worked on that disease understand the frustration of having to deal with a disease that you could diagnose but not understand what causes it, what is the mechanism, and how to treat it. So I think that was the first indication that this black box can be pried open. And one by one, we and others found causes for this disease. They are not all done yet. Still, about 85% of the cases do not have a known cause. And that's a huge problem and a frustration. Then we went on to discover other genes that cause muscle disease and nerve disease. And then not too long ago, a new gene in Parkinson's disease. That was the same year, I think, when Muhammad Ali passed away, who also had a form of Parkinsonism. So that is just the first step, a very difficult step. Took us years and years to collect information on families, because the structure of these families is such that in genetics you need a lot of people with a disease. And this is relatively rare diseases, but on the other hand, if you combine these rare diseases, then they become a large number. And so that is the conundrum, that how do you deal with rare diseases? And how do you try to reduce the suffering? Because, public health problems are in the public eye, but rare diseases that are in the backwaters. And sometimes those rare diseases affect behavior, or they can affect cognition. And so those people are physically and sometimes emotionally impaired, and they just cannot be in the public eye. So they are in the backwaters of America. With my mentor at Duke, we once took a study for a disease called myotonic dystrophy, which affects many systems beside muscle. It affects the ability to for cognition. It affects reproduction. It affects the eyes. It has many effects. It affects the heart. And so we traveled from Durham, North Carolina by car through the backwaters of this country, finally arriving in Chicago. And I could see how these people lived in trailer parks and without any recourse. Many of them were physically so impaired they couldn't get to their doctor. And so that sort of reveals the underbelly of the medical condition in this country of many, many people who just don't have any support. The causes of their disease, of that particular disease, was not known then. It was discovered later. And so attempts have been going on to treat them, to find ways of treating them, because the step from knowing the cause to knowing the mechanism is a big one. And that has not been fully spanned.
So you mentioned 85% of diseases, people don't know what are the causes of that. Did I understood you correctly?
Well, that's in case of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. In case of ALS, 85% of the cases, the cause and the mechanism is not known. And there is no animal model for those 85%. We have made animal models for about 10% of the cases. And by we, I mean the medical community.
And what's
We made
the
model, but subsequently we made another model for excuse me.
So how many people are researching these things in the United States?
Well, when we started, it was a small undertaking. I mean, very few people. But as we were able to, and the community was able to expand, so it became a larger and larger interest, because there was something that was doable. There was a thread that you could pull on. Prior to that, there was nothing to hold on to find out what's behind it. See, it's like looking for a end in a reel of thread, and if you can't find that end, you keep going round and round. And that's how it had been since the disease was first described in 1865. But that end was found, and that end has been pulled now, and we are starting to unravel to a great degree how this disease works. But there's still a long way to go.
So what are the next steps in that research?
Well, there are two. One is to do what is called boutique treatment, which is to treat the genetic defect. So if something is missing, it can be supplied through a viral vector, through a virus that has been gutted and just has the structure and doesn't have anything inside. That you put the cargo in there, and that cargo is delivered. The viruses don't multiply; they are impaired, And so you can deliver the gene of interest to where you want to go. And this is easy in cases where something is missing, some gene product, a protein is missing, and you can provide it. In other cases, the protein that is being produced is toxic. So you have to disable that gene so that that toxic protein is no longer produced. And the third thing that we have done is to identify a common pathology in all of ALS and ALS dementia. And we identified two different genes. So that was the first link between cause and pathology. So that's the third approach that we have been successful with in identifying compounds that improve the overall health of the neuron by making the quality control of the protein cycling improve. And that seems to be a basic pathology in not only ALS, but also in Parkinson's disease and in Alzheimer's disease. And so we've had some success. We have found the target. We found this enzyme that is crucial in recycling of proteins, and these compounds seem to target it. But the progress is slow because of resources. If one has resources, one can move faster. But at least we have a promising end that we can hold on to and develop.
How long will it take, say, for example, to get some medicines developed based on what you have done, or some cure developed for, say, much more known diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer?
So first, the gene that the first one that we discovered with our colleagues, that gene is now being treated by a number of companies. Nothing to do with me, but those who have the funds to do it, those companies are on it, and they have found, well, there are two known ways of doing it. So one company is working with trying to silence the gene through putting in small fragments of nucleic acids. That's the common way. And the other company has, as I said, is using a virus. That's a big company, and they are introducing a mechanism by which that gene can be disabled. So that's about 2% of cases with ALS that they're working on, and the treatment is exceedingly expensive. We're talking about millions of dollars for treatment. Now,
Millions of dollars treatment for one person?
so one related disease is in childhood, spinal muscular atrophy, and that's the second most common carrier gene that is in the white population and also in other populations. But you need a double dose. You need both parents to have that gene missing in order to produce this infantile paralysis that kills the child if they have no gene left for that particular function. If they have one gene left or some of those partially active genes left, then they may have a milder disease. So it comes in three flavors, severe disease that kills the child within 4 years. Child cannot sit. The second form that comes, the child can sit but cannot walk. And the third, the person can walk but has difficulty, in physical activity. These kids are very smart. They don't have any cognitive problems. So the treatment for that now is there's a defective gene there's a second copy of a defective gene that can be made to work harder. And that's been now developed by a company and costs $200,000 for a shot. So these are exceedingly expensive medications. Now, many of these disorders are what we call Mendelian disorders. In other words, the disease is manifested by a gene that is defective, and it can be detected before a child is born. It can be detected in the parents And so a simple public health approach to these problems would be much cheaper, would be to provide that sequencing data for that particular gene, but also for many other common genes and not so common genes to people of reproductive age, so that they can decide uh, what they would want to do with reproduction, A, and B, the person they want to marry or have children with. This is not an unusual idea. It has been worked out in thalassemia, even in highly conservative countries like Saudi Arabia. They have a requirement for marriage certificates to have thalassemia testing. First started in Cyprus under the United Nations. So this is all doable. I think same sort of a thing can be done with sickle cell disease and others, but there has to be a will. There has to be a public will to be able to do this, to start teaching in elementary or grade school about genetics and the landscape of human disease. Somehow, children and adults go into life thinking they're going to live forever and they will be young forever. I think the landscape of the human condition needs to be taught early. I think it will give some pause for thought for many of the things that happen in society that need not happen if we produce a more thoughtful generation of people to understand our mortality and the human condition.
Well, thank you so much. This is Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Dr. Teepu Siddique, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. You're watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, Apple TV, as well as many on social media, and our website, muslimnetwork.tv. We're talking with Dr. Teepu Siddique, who has discovered, along with his team, genes which causes ALS and Parkinson's and Alzheimer conditions. Tell us this. So, two ways to do it. One, they have taken the research which you have done and develop some cure, an injection, which is extremely costly and is cost prohibitive. So you're advising if those discoveries could be used essentially for people to screen themselves before they decide to have children, and that will be probably the cheaper, more commonly available model that you catch it before there is a problem. Now tell me, how does Northwestern University, where you have done research, benefits financially from what companies are doing? They are charging millions of dollars.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I couldn't hear you.
How the Northwestern University benefits financially from the research.
For some reason, I'm losing your voice signal.
Okay. How does Northwestern University benefits from this financially from this research?
Okay, I couldn't hear. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you because it broke up. The signal broke up for some reason.
All right. I will make another attempt, and then we will think that probably there is a problem which we cannot fix. Sorry for those of you who are watching. I will talk to you for a minute before I pose another question. Professor Teepu Siddique has done amazing research, and him and his team has discovered genes which are responsible for causing ALS disease, Alzheimer disease, as well as Parkinson's. Parkinson's is the one which impacted, and eventually he passed away under that, our champion Muhammad Ali. And it was discovered at the time when he passed away. So now there is a, based on his and his team's research, there are companies which is not affiliated with it. They are offering medicine and cure, which takes millions of dollars. Second, and there is some injection, which itself costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. So his idea is that research could be used actually in a preventive manner. So people are screened if they have those type of gene issues, so they stop from conceiving children who potentially will have those type of problem. So let me ask him once again the question which I posed earlier, that Dr. Teepu Siddique, you're affiliated with the university, Northwestern University, and that's where this research is done under your leadership and by your team. I'm trying to discover the link between university research or pharmaceutical making money on that research. How does Northwestern University or you and your team financially benefit from this research?
So first of all, I want to make a correction that the genes are for ALS, muscle disease, and nerve diseases, but not for Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
So we don't have a contribution there. And we have made animal models, which is most important, so that all these drugs that are tested on those animal models for ALS and for ALS dementia. ALS can also come with dementia.
What does animal model means?
So we introduced the human gene, mutant gene, into this mice model, and those mice developed the pathology of the disease, or behavior of the disease, or the weakness or the paralysis. And so the way the university benefits and the inventors benefit is that, for example, in this mouse model, the companies will license from the university use of this mouse model to test their drugs. Now, we distribute them freely for researchers. For example, we place them in something called it's Jackson Laboratories, that with small amount of money, they take care of these mice, they breed them, and they sell them small amounts of money to researchers all across the world. But the companies license them from the university, and that licensing fees goes to the university. For example, if there are 3 inventors and the revenue is $500,000, the inventors will get $60,000. So if there are 3 inventors, they'll be $20,000 each. But the rest of the money goes to the university, to the dean, to the head of the department, and to the university as a whole. So clearly, we do this not for the money. The university benefits from it, obviously, but we do it for trying to reduce the suffering in the world. And that's the whole thing, isn't it? That our faith teaches us is to try and reduce the suffering in this world, whether it is human suffering or animal suffering or whatever kind of suffering there is. One will never succeed in completely eliminating it, but one can certainly make an effort to try and reduce it within the resources a person or a group has and the environment they live in. So that's the idea. Now, as you know, the universities have developed relationships with across America and across the world with the companies, with these commercial institutions. And that's a double-edged sword. Whereas it provides some funding to the universities, it also impacts upon science as it should be practiced, which is, without a major commercial interest or money-making interest. I mean, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be compensation of some sort, but then when it becomes the primary objective, then everything suffers and everything becomes secretive and not shared and trivialized. So that's been a problem with the university, not our university, but just generally the idea of the university has been subverted in that fashion. The second issue that has become important in the university and hospitals is the corporate mentality that governs it, especially in medicine, which has now become a commodity rather than a human right. And so this McDonaldization of medicine has greatly impacted American health. And as you can see, that the entire country was completely unprepared for this pandemic and miserably failed all the way from the hospitals to the medical schools and to the government itself, because the structure was set up for acute illness of the kind that is predictable and can bring in funds and money to these institutions. It's a corporate system that is top down and opaque. And so, yes.
Let me ask you a general question. What percentage of human body or diseases our science knows? Any idea how much we do not know?
Yeah, so we know very little. So a lot of it is empirical science, and so that's a problem of premise that has been used by corporate medicine to, as if everything was known. As you know, when you make a hamburger in McDonald's, you know exactly what needs to be made, how much of meat to put in, how much of other ingredients, how long to cook it, how it can be preserved. So you know from A to Z. And so they have taken that model and put it in medicine when, as you pointed out, very little for the lot of conditions is known. I mean, we know some, and we have had some successes, but most of the successes have come from prevention. If you look at heart disease, if you look at diabetes, any other disease that we know something about, it is prevention. We know there is genetic contributions to these major diseases, but the main effect is environmental. Whether that environment is in the mother's womb, or it is in childhood, or it is during adulthood, but a lot of it is environmental in terms of lifestyles and behavior and stress, those sort of things. So there's no money there. There's very little money to be made in those things, but that's what is needed. Diabetic clinics used to have nurses. They don't seem to have them anymore, who would follow the patient every week and check with them and check their doses and educate them and make sure that they got everything they needed from a moment to moment, day to day, whatever time they needed to. So that's not a money making thing. So the corporate medicine approach has been to not invest in those activities, even though they are very important for public health. So all kinds of secondary phenomena has risen. The physician is now salaried, no longer autonomous. Her decisions are determined by insurance companies and corporate medicine. So salaried without autonomy. So they have sold everything. Instead of being autonomous with a salary, as in many other countries, they are autonomous, non-autonomous, and salaried. And so it's a predicament. That's why there's so much of burnout amongst physicians, suicide rates. All those things are under the carpet generally. Sometimes they are talked about, but it's a huge problem. And it tells you that when you have a responsibility, but you have no authority or very little authority.
You're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, and our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Professor Teepu Siddique, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Dr. Teepu Siddique. Tell us about this. There is I have been told it's anecdotal evidence, except that one Muslim physician was a professor, and one had his practice. Another was in so doctors and Muslim physicians in America.
Again, I can't hear you, sir. It's thing is breaking up.
Okay, so
it must be my Wi-Fi or something.
Yeah, we will be. So I'm for my audience, I will take a minute before I pose another question.
Okay, I think you're back again. Okay.
So one question I wanted to ask you was that I keep hearing from different physicians here and there that Muslims in the field of medicine, field of medicine is one of the most respected professions in America, according to 10 years of surveys by Gallup International. And Muslim physicians play a critical role, not only in the Muslim community, but also saving lives all across country. And what I am hearing is that Muslim physicians are facing discrimination in their own field. What has been your observation?
Well, I think I have a slightly different view on this. I think the problem is the structure of corporate medicine and corporate medical schools and colleges and universities. You see, there was a time when there was overt discrimination. And as you know, that as people came in with different backgrounds, they were assimilated into the Jews became white, the Arabs became white eventually over time. They were incorporated into the white or the ruling, or you can say the dominant culture. And so now they can't openly discriminate. So what they do really is to hire people whom they call nice, N-I-C-E, nice within inverted commas. And what nice they mean is that they are corporately groomed for working in corporations, and they will not make any waves or say anything or do anything. They will be compliant. So they can be women, they can be black folks, they can be Muslims. As long as they are compliant, they are acceptable. So this is the new paradigm that no, we don't discriminate against black people, we don't discriminate against Muslims or anybody else, but we hire people who are compliant because it's a top-down phenomena, it's opaque, and we want to make sure that they are nice and fit into our culture. And that culture is then perpetuated, whatever the color of the person. Now, of course, there are very few people of color in decision-making processes, or even women, but those who make it there, they make it there after they have completely acculturized themselves to what is expected. So it's a new paradigm that is a kind of a discrimination that is based upon corporatism, if you want to call it that. Because, the Supreme Court says that the corporation is a person. So that lets off people who are actually running the corporation off the hook. Corporation is nothing. It's an abstract idea, isn't it? It is run by human beings, and they are not responsible for its behavior. So they get off the hook. And so that's, I mean, I don't want to sound paranoid. I'm just trying to explain the structure of how things work. And from their point of view, they have worked this out very well. And it protects them, it protects the way the thing works. But does it work for human health? I don't think so. I don't think it hurts. And I think this, I don't have to demonstrate it, as they say in Persian, that the proof of the sun is the sun itself. People have seen what has happened in COVID and how this great country, very powerful, wealthy country with 7 aircraft carriers floating in the seas of the world, could not deal with COVID. And, every day we lose 1,000 people. So you can say that every 3 days we lose a similar number of people as died in 9/11. And yet there is nothing that is provoking the people to say what went wrong. It's not just one person, it's the system that went wrong, all the way from the government bodies that were unprepared, even though there were movies and there were books and there was, people who were doing research, but they were not prepared. They were not even prepared for personal protective equipment. Physicians and nurses who protested, they were fired by the corporate medicine people. So,
wait a minute. You're saying that those nurses and physicians who were tested positive were fired?
no, protested. Protested that there was not enough, or they expressed their opinion. See, you have to realize that in corporate medicine or in corporations, you lose your constitutional rights once you enter their premises and become their salaried employee. So when you object to their policies publicly or even within the system, they can fire you. So these are cases that can be looked up in the press of how some people were fired who had the courage enough to speak that these PPEs are not adequate, these masks are not adequate. If you remember, the CDC said the masks were not needed, and now they're saying everybody needs a mask. So this is no, we knew from day one, common sense medicine, that masks were needed. It was shown in places like Hong Kong and Singapore and other places where they had similar diseases before, that that's what is needed. And yet the highest body in this country was saying, the CDC, that you don't need masks. And it is just tragedy, So as I said, so many people have died and continue to die. The door has been closed after the horse left the barn. And there is nobody with courage to say we did wrong, or we were unprepared, or we should reform. There is no insight into behavior. There is no mechanism by which people can express regret and do better. Everything is papered over, and that's the corporate mindset, never to admit that you're wrong. Even when you settle in cases with corporations, you are instructed not to talk about it, because that is one of the conditions of any settlement. So that sort of pervades throughout society, that never to admit that you made a mistake, never to admit openly and publicly and say we are wrong and we did this and we don't deserve to govern. So that sort of insight is not there, and that's very harmful for public health. I think people need to understand that public health is a human right, and therefore it must be treated as a human right. And for that, we need to put in place all those requirements for preventive disease. And this particular pandemic, there are 200 different zoonoses, that is, these diseases that come from animals. We have a grant with the CDC about, we think, uh, organism that is ubiquitously present, which may provoke an innate immunity response in humans and cause certain diseases. It's just at a very preliminary stage yet. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you disturb the environment of animals, then they will become stressed. And when they become stressed, then their immune system will fail. And when their immune system fails, then the viruses or other microorganisms will multiply. And in that multiplication cycle, especially in viruses, they evolve and they have mutations that may allow them to adapt to other organisms, other animals or humans. And that's what happened with SARS. That's SARS-1 and SARS-2, and that's what happened with previous infections. It's four of the cold viruses that are common are coronaviruses, and they came from animals. One of them came 1,000 years ago, it is said, through camels, from bats, and then to humans. And one came about 100 years ago from cattle, from bats to humans. So the bats are a big reservoir of viruses and other organisms. And if you disturb their habitat, so from a Muslim point of view, there's an issue of tayyib, which is that you must eat those things that are appropriate for human consumption. Number one. Number two, the animal must be reared in a way that is compassionate. When you bring these animals into markets and stress them and cage them, or you have factory farms, and these animals are hugely under stress, their immune system fails. And that's when they acquire diseases that they transmit. This happens in chicken, this happens in pigs, this happens in cattle. So all this food in the market that is brought to you is really not tayyib.
So tell me this, where does this discussion takes place in your profession? I mean, you're a researcher, you're a physician, and now you're talking about disturbing the animals' kingdom with human interferences and mutations of their things because there is stress coming to human being. These type of questions, are they discussed in some conferences on ethical issues? Or these become part of no matter which field you're researching? For example, the area of your research, are these ethical issues are discussed? Are they part of the textbook which your scholars read?
Very little. It's all technical and technique focused. Now, there are journals in which these things are published, but most physicians don't read those journals. I remember one, the Neuroscience Society is the largest neuroscience society, not just neurology, but neuroscience society in the world. It has 20,000 to 30,000 attendees in their conference every fall. And I attended a session in which they were using a system of MRI called functional MRI to claim states of mind. And so, in other words, they were invading your cranium to show that you are either a criminal or a terrorist or a bad person by mere pictures. And when I asked about the person who was from England, and I asked that, what about the constraints, because the state can use this, like they use truth serum or other things that have no real scientific validity. The person who was very senior in that field said, "Oh, that's not our business. That's the business of the government." So this desire for new things and try to shoehorn things that don't even have good science behind them. Human behavior is very complex. And to sort of reduce it to mere pictures of blood flow is ridiculous, to say the least. And yet, those sort of instruments are being developed, have been developed. What I'm trying to echo with you is that the ethical aspect of medicine and science is there marginally. It's not there in the main.
So much, Professor Dev, to truly appreciate you sparing your time to discuss what you have done and what are the state of affairs in the world of medicine. You have been watching Muslim Network TV at Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku and Apple TV, and our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. And thank you so much, Dr. Teepu Siddique, and thank you, Dr. Abdul Wahid, for producing today's show. Peace.
It's my pleasure, and thank you both
Thank you.
for inviting me.